The fog came crawling out of the trees before dawn, heavy as smoke, swallowing sound and light alike, the kind of fog that makes men disappear without dying. We were dug into the edge of the Hurtgen forest, cold mud up to our shins, breath hanging like ghosts in the air, and no one dared lift his head for more than a second. The snipers had us pinned since the night before, 4 of them, by our count, maybe more. They were patient, precise, the kind of killers who didn't waste bullets. Every time someone moved too fast, or raised a helmet above the trench line, a single crack echoed and another man fell. You stop counting after a while, because numbers don't help when the trees themselves seem to be watching. I'd been through Anzio, through the hedgerows in France, but that forest had a silence that could eat a man alive. We'd been without food for a full day, low on ammo, and the medics had no stretchers left, just waiting, hoping for night to cover us long enough to crawl out. That's when the new kid showed up, Private Sam Collins, Company E, fresh from Ohio, cheeks still too smooth to have seen hell yet. He stumbled into our position, like a ghost that didn't know he was dead yet. His uniform was soaked, his rifle half-caked in mud, and his eyes, those blue, trembling eyes, looked both scared and calm at the same time. He didn't say much at first, just crouched beside me, wiped his rifle with a shaking hand, and asked quietly, "Where are they?" I pointed toward the ridge, about 200 yards out. That's where we'd seen the glint of scopes earlier. "Don't bother, kid," I told him. "You poke your head out there, you'll be fertilizer before breakfast." He nodded, but didn't seem to hear. He just stared through the mist, like he was trying to listen for something the rest of us couldn't hear. The kid had a strange way about him, still, deliberate, like he wasn't afraid of dying, just curious about how it would happen. After a minute, he shouldered his rifle. That's when I noticed it. He leaned in on the stock the wrong way, his left cheek pressed against it, but his right eye was open, searching down the barrel like it was the one in control. I almost laughed. "You're holding it wrong," I whispered. He blinked once, calm as a man counting seconds, and said, "No, sir. This is how I see straight." I wanted to correct him, wanted to tell him that in this forest, the wrong move meant a hole in your head, but something about his voice stopped me. It wasn't arrogance, it was something quieter, certainty. The first shot cracked before I even realized he'd squeezed the trigger. A puff of smoke rose from the ridge, followed by a single thud. Silence. Not even the wind moved for a second. Then another flash. Another shot. He didn't flinch, didn't breathe, just adjusted slightly, exhaled, and fired again. The third one came so quick it sounded like the same echo rolling down the hill. When it ended, 90 seconds, maybe less, the forest was empty. No return fire, just the smell of burned powder and the sound of my heart hammering in. He'd hit all 4, every last one of them. One through the eye, one through the neck, one straight through the scope, split the damn lens in half, and the 4th somewhere behind a fallen log, dead before he could crawl away. I crawled out a bit to check, half expecting a trap, but no, they were gone. When I got back, the kid was sitting in the mud, reloading calmly, like he'd just done his chores. I asked him how he saw them through the fog, how he knew where to shoot. He just said, "I see things a little off-center, always have." I stared at him, not sure if he was joking or confessing. Then he added, "Most people aim with their strong eye. Mine's the other one. My daddy said I was born backward, but I just see different." He smiled when he said that, and it wasn't the smile of a killer. It was a kid's smile, the kind you lose the first time someone dies next to you. But somehow, he hadn't lost it yet. Maybe that was what made him dangerous. Maybe innocence itself is the most frightening thing on a battlefield. The rest of the platoon started calling him Wrong Eye after that. It stuck. He didn't mind, said it sounded better than Sam. I remember thinking how strange it was that one small twist of nature, a mismatched eye, had just saved 8 men from certain death. The fog began to lift as the sun clawed its way through the treetop, and for the first time in hours, I could hear birds again. The war paused, just for that heartbeat, and in the middle of it all stood that kid with his rifle, eyes mismatched and steady, as if he'd finally found a place that made sense. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing those shots in my head, perfectly spaced, perfectly timed. I wondered if maybe he'd been touched by something beyond skill. There are moments out there when you start believing that death picks favorites, and maybe that morning, death had chosen to look the other way. Collins didn't brag. He didn't say a word about it when the lieutenant came by asking how we got free. He just said they stopped shooting and went back to cleaning his weapon. But I saw it in his hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Maybe he realized what he'd done. Maybe he didn't. But from that moment on, every man in that trench looked at him differently, not as a rookie anymore. but as someone the forest itself had tested and let live. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this story. I'd like to know how far Sam's story reaches, how far the fog of that morning still travels. When the echo of that last shot faded into the hills, none of us spoke for a long time. It wasn't just that the gunfire had stopped, it was the way the silence settled in, thick and watchful, as if the forest itself was holding its breath to see what we'd do next. You could almost hear the snow melt in the branches, water dripping like seconds off a clock. We had been trapped for 2 days, waiting to die one by one, and now the world around us seemed unreal, too still to trust. I remember crawling out from behind a stump and feeling the damp earth stick to my hands, half expecting a bullet to find me the second I stood up, but nothing came, only quiet, only that strange peace that doesn't belong in war. Sam was still sitting there, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the ridge, as if he couldn't quite believe it either. He looked smaller somehow, not like a hero, just a kid who'd done something that no one would have asked of him, something that would follow him longer than the rest of us would live. The lieutenant came limping up through the mud, face grey with exhaustion, asking who had taken the shots. When I pointed at Collins, he just stared at him for a long time, like he didn't know whether to congratulate him or pray for him. Finally, he said, "Good work, son," and walked off toward the ridge to confirm the kills. That was the first time I saw the rookie's hands start to shake. The adrenaline must have been leaving him, and reality was catching up. He kept looking at his rifle, rubbing his thumb along the bolt, whispering something too quiet for me to hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name. I'd seen men fall apart after combat before, but not like this. This wasn't shock, it was clarity. He had seen death up close, and it had looked back through the scope. When the lieutenant came back, he said something that still rings in my ears. 4 of them, all snipers, one's scope shattered clean through. Never seen shooting like that. He paused, then looked down at Sam. "You did good, Collins, but don't let it get to your head. Out here, luck runs out fast." Sam nodded, but he didn't answer. He just looked at the trees, where the mist was thinning into sunlight. I don't think he was proud. I think he was trying to figure out why he was still alive. That's the thing most people never understand about killing. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like surviving in someone else's place. We spent the rest of the morning moving through the ridge, clearing the enemy nest. The snipers were still where they'd fallen, their faces pale and still, rifles half buried in the pine needle. One of them couldn't have been older than Sam. That's what hit me hardest. Their helmets had the same scratches, their boots the same mud, their pockets the same rations we carried, different flags, same fear. I watched Sam kneel beside one of them and pull something from the man's coat, a small photograph, a woman and a child smiling in front of a farmhouse. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it back exactly where he'd found it. When he stood, his eyes were different. He wasn't the wide-eyed kid from Ohio anymore. Something inside him had shifted, something that never goes back once it breaks loose. That afternoon, we finally got resupplied, hot rations, clean water, new orders. We were to push deeper into the forest the next day. Nobody said it, but every man knew we might not come back. Still, there was something in the air that day, hope, maybe, or stubborn defiance. We'd survived what should have killed us. The men treated Sam like a lucky charm. They started asking him to check their sights, to look through their scopes and tell them if they were off. It was like they believed his strange vision could see what the rest of us couldn't. He didn't like the attention. Every time someone tried to thank him, he just smiled politely and said, "Anyone could have done it." But that wasn't true. None of us could have done what he did, and deep down, he knew that too. That night, as we sat around a small fire, I finally asked him how he'd learned to shoot. He said his father used to hunt deer back home and taught him how to aim with the eye that saw differently. He said it made me pay more attention. Sam said when you see wrong, you have to see better. I remember how he stared into the flames after, eyes glinting with orange light. He never came back from the Pacific, he added softly, so I figured I'd do what he taught me, even if I got it wrong. There was no pride in his voice, only a quiet ache that made me look away. War was full of ghosts, and I think his had been sitting beside him the whole time. The forest grew darker, the sky thick with smoke from distant artillery. Somewhere far off, we could hear the rumble of tanks moving through the valley. It reminded us that the war didn't stop just because we caught our breath. The lieutenant passed around a bottle of whiskey someone had been saving since Normandy, and when it reached Sam, he took a small sip and coughed, grinning for the first time since the morning. "Guess I'm not bulletproof after all," he said, and a few of the guys laughed. It felt good to hear laughter again, even if it sounded nervous. But when the fire burned low and the stars began to show through the smoke, everyone went quiet. One by one, the men drifted off to sleep, but I couldn't. I lay there staring at the dark outline of the trees, listening to the forest breathe. Every so often, I'd glance at Sam. He was awake too, staring up at the sky, his rifle beside him. I don't know what he was thinking, but I knew what I felt, that the kid had changed something in all of us. We'd been broken, beaten, cornered, and somehow, through his strange, wrong eye way of seeing, he'd reminded us what it meant to fight like we still mattered. The next morning, I saw him cleaning his weapon again, slow and methodical. He caught me watching and said, "I don't want to forget how it felt when the world went quiet." I didn't understand what he meant then. Later, I did. Sometimes silence is more dangerous than gunfire because it gives your mind space to remember. And out there, memory could be the heaviest burden of all. If you're hearing this now and something about Sam's story makes you stop for a second, subscribe. Not for the channel, but for the memory of all the kids who saw the world differently and because of that, saw us through. The dawn that followed was a cruel one, all pale light and metallic air, the kind that freezes breath before it leaves your mouth. We moved before sunrise, stepping through the mist like shadows, rifles held low, boots sinking into frost. The lieutenant's voice was low when he briefed us. We were heading east, toward a small clearing where German spotters had been sighted. The enemy had dug in deep. Machine guns covered the trails, and mines lined the open ground. We knew what that meant. Another slaughter, another roll of the dice with death. Still, we went. That's the thing about war. The choice goes out of it after a while. You move because stopping means thinking, and thinking can kill you faster than bullets. Sam walked just ahead of me, calm as ever, his helmet tilted slightly, that crooked way he always wore it, like it didn't quite belong to him. The fog clung to the trees, and the forest smelled of cold metal and rot. Every step forward sounded too loud. Every crack of twig made us flinch. By the time the first shot hit, I didn't even see where it came from. The man to my left, Harrison, went down hard. No sound, just folded like paper. The lieutenant dropped, shouting for cover, and suddenly, the world turned into thunder. Machine gun fire ripped through the tree line, tracer rounds slicing through the haze like burning threads. We dove into whatever cover we could find. Logs, rocks, holes no deeper than a shovel's width. Dirt exploded around us, chunks of bark flying like knives. The air itself felt alive, screaming. I remember gripping my rifle so hard, my knuckles went numb, trying to find where the hell they were shooting from, but it was impossible. The forest was alive with muzzle flashes. Everyone gone before you could blink. That's when Sam slid beside me again, face calm, breathing steady. He peered through his scope, moving slow, scanning left to right. I couldn't see anything. He whispered, "There," and fired once. One of the machine guns went silent. He shifted, fired again. Another flash disappeared. I don't know how he did it. The rest of us were blind. The air was smoke and dust, but he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. We began to move under his cover fire, crawling through the mud, taking ground inch by inch. Every time we thought we were pinned, another of his shots broke the pattern, giving us a breath of space to move. It wasn't perfect. A bullet grazed my arm. Another took part of the lieutenant's pack clean off. The forest felt like it was closing in, alive and angry. I remember Sam stopping for half a second, eyes narrowing, then pulling the trigger so fast it sounded like instinct. A sniper had been waiting, hidden behind a shattered birch. Sam's shot hit him before he even fired. "You see him?" I asked. "No," he said softly, but I felt where he'd be. There was no bravado in his voice, just focus, like he'd tuned into something beyond sight. We reached the ridge by midday. Smoke rose from the other side, and the stench of burned fuel and blood thickened the air. That's when the counterattack came. Mortars first, then the screaming. Those high mechanical howls that tear the sky open before the shells hit. We scattered, trees shattered like bones. I fell hard, ears ringing, face in the dirt. When I looked up, everything was chaos. Men shouting orders, bodies dragging through mud, the kind of noise that tears your thoughts apart. Sam was maybe 20 feet ahead, crouched low behind a fallen trunk, scanning again. I crawled to him, shouting over the thunder, "We've got to fall back!" He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that distant stare, the kind that said he'd already made peace with something. Then I saw what he was aiming at. A German squad pushing through the smoke, 3 of them with rifles, 1 carrying a radio. He fired once, dropped the radio man, reloaded, fired again. The recoil barely moved him. The rest scattered, returning fire, bullets chewing bark around him. Still, he stayed there, calm. eyes flicking between both sides like a chess player, mapping moves only he could see. A shell hit nearby, and I felt the ground lift beneath me, hot and violent. When I came to, my ears were buzzing, vision swimming. The sky was full of dust and falling leaves. I shouted for Sam, but couldn't hear my own voice. Crawling through smoke, I saw him lying a few yards away, motionless. I thought he was gone. My chest turned to stone. I dragged myself toward him, hands burning, and rolled him over. His helmet was cracked, blood running from his temple, but his eyes blinked open. "Still here," he muttered, half a smile on his face. Then he coughed, spat dirt, and grabbed his rifle again. "They're flanking left." I didn't know how he could even tell in that chaos, but sure enough, when I looked, there they were, shadows moving through the trees. What happened next didn't feel real. Sam pushed himself up onto one knee, steadying the rifle with shaking hands. He fired 4 times in under 20 seconds. Each shot cut through the air like a hammer through glass. Each shot hit home. When the smoke cleared, the flank was gone. The forest fell silent again. This time, no one dared move. The lieutenant, bleeding from his shoulder, came stumbling up behind me and saw what had happened. "How many?" he asked. "4, I said. "Always 4. Sam lowered his rifle slowly, eyes glassy, breathing ragged. He looked like he might collapse. I grabbed his shoulder, tried to steady him, but he just stared past me at the trees. "They move before they fire," he whispered. "You can see it if you stop thinking." When reinforcements arrived that evening, the forest looked like something out of a nightmare. Blackened trees, half-buried bodies, smoke curling from the earth. The sun was setting, all orange and red through the haze, turning everything into shadow. Sam sat on a rock, rifle across his lap, staring into nothing. The medics tried to patch him up, but he kept waving them away. "I'm fine," he said, though he wasn't. None of us were. The lieutenant told him he'd saved the whole company twice in as many days, but Sam didn't even blink. He just said, "I didn't save anyone. I just saw what they didn't." Then he stood up and walked away from the light, disappearing into the grey. I watched him go until the fog swallowed him. There was something haunting in the way he moved, something final, as if the forest had claimed him as one of its own. We didn't see him again until the next morning, sitting alone by the stream, eyes hollow, hands shaking like he'd been fighting ghosts all night. And maybe he had. War changes men, but for some, it doesn't just change them, it redefines what they are. For Sam, I think that morning was the moment he stopped being a soldier and became something else entirely. We gathered what was left of the fallen and burned the enemy weapons in a pile, flames licking high into the dusk. The lieutenant stood beside me and said quietly, "That kid's not lucky. He's cursed with seeing too much." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew he was right. The days that followed bled together in a haze of smoke, cold, and sleepless eyes. After the ridge fight, the Hurtgen swallowed us deeper. The air never cleared, not once. It hung thick with the smell of burnt pine and frozen blood, and everything we touched felt damp and alive, like the forest itself was breathing. The Germans were pulling back, but not far. You could feel them watching from the tree line, waiting for us to lose focus, to make noise, to sleep. We learned to whisper like ghosts and move like shadows. We stopped lighting fires. We stopped talking about home. Even laughter died out, smothered by the weight of everything unsaid. Sam changed in those days. He still cleaned his rifle every morning, still checked everyone's scopes before patrol, still aimed with that wrong eye that made sense only to him. But he'd gone quiet, even for him. His face had that distant calm, the kind you only see in men who've stared too long into something they shouldn't have survived. One night, I found him sitting alone near the edge of camp, staring at his reflection in a puddle. His helmet was off, his hair matted with dirt and blood, his fingers trembling. I sat beside him, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the forest whispering and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere in the dark. Finally, he said, "I keep seeing their eyes." I asked, "Whose?" He looked up at me, slow and empty. "All of them. The ones I killed. They don't look angry. They just look surprised." I didn't know what to say. I'd seen that look too, more times than I wanted to remember. The moment before a man dies, there's no hatred left, just confusion, like his mind can't catch up to what's happening. It's not something you can forget, no matter how many medals they give you. Sam rubbed his face hard, smearing mud across his cheek. "When I close my right eye," he said, "I see them clear as day. When I close the left, they're gone. Maybe I should have never aimed with the wrong one." The next morning, the lieutenant gave us new orders: move east and secure a crossroads that led toward a German supply route. It sounded simple, but nothing in that forest ever was. We were down to 20 men by then, half of them wounded, all of them running on fumes. The air was colder, sharper, like knives on the lungs. The snow had started again, light flakes drifting through the ruined canopy. It made everything look too peaceful, too quiet, like the world had forgotten what had happened here. We moved through that white silence in single file, rifles up, eyes scanning. Sam was point man, as always. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch, just walked like he belonged there, like the forest itself had given him passage. I followed behind, watching his shoulders move with mechanical precision. Every few steps he'd stop, tilt his head slightly, listening, not for sound, but for rhythm, like he could hear the enemy breathing through the trees. We found the crossroads just before dusk. It was nothing but a small clearing with an old cart track cutting through it, but it felt like the center of the world. On the far side, a half-collapsed barn stood, roof caved in, walls black with soot. That's where we dug in for the night. The snow thickened, and the wind picked up, whistling through the holes in the boards. I remember thinking it felt almost safe, until Sam froze. He had his rifle halfway up before I even heard the sound. A faint metallic click, barely audible over the wind. Then the flash. A sniper's round shattered the plank beside my head, splinters slicing across my cheek. The forest erupted, bullets snapped through the dark, and the world turned red with tracers. We dove for cover, returning fire blindly, flashes lighting the barn like lightning. Men screamed, someone shouted for medics, someone else cursed the fog. Sam didn't move like the rest of us. He didn't shout or panic. He stepped out into the open, slow and deliberate, scanning the tree line with that tilted head. "Get down!" I yelled, but he didn't even look back. He raised his rifle and fired once. A flash from the ridge went dark. Another shot, another silence. He moved forward, through the snow, shoulders squared, firing rhythmically, each pull of the trigger followed by a sharp, distant collapse. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was hunting. When it was over, the wind was the only thing left making noise. 5 men down, 3 wounded, 4 enemy snipers dead. Again, always 4. He walked back through the clearing, eyes unfocused, steps uneven. When he reached me, he sat down hard against the wall, rifle across his knees. His breath came in short bursts, and his lips were trembling. "They keep lining up the same way," he muttered. "Same distance, same time apart. It's like they already know where I'll look." The lieutenant came over, praising him again, saying he'd saved the squad. But Sam wasn't listening. He was staring at his hands, whispering numbers under his breath. Timing, maybe, or counting ghosts. When the lieutenant walked away, I crouched beside him and said, "You did what you had to do." He shook his head. "No, it's what I was made to do. That's worse." He looked at me then, eyes wet, voice barely above a whisper. "What if this is all I'm good at? What if this eye thing isn't a gift? It's just broken?" I didn't have an answer. There's no comfort in war, no right words. You either make peace with the pieces of yourself that survive, or you don't. That night, the snow buried the blood, and by morning, it was like nothing had happened. The forest always erases what it doesn't want to remember, but we remembered. Every man there carried a piece of that night in his chest. 2 days later, Sam stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he said he could see the glint of scopes waiting in the dark. Once, I woke to find him standing watch long after his shift had ended, rifle aimed at nothing, finger trembling on the trigger. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched so hard he almost shot me. "Sorry," he whispered, lowering the gun. "I thought I saw something move." I told him it was just the wind, but he didn't believe me. He said, "The forest doesn't move unless it means to." That scared me more than the bullets ever had. By the time we reached the next village, Sam looked hollowed out, skin pale, eyes sunken. The other men avoided him now. They still respected him, still called him Wrong Eye, but there was fear in their voices when they said it, like the name itself carried bad luck. He didn't talk much anymore, just followed orders and kept to himself. But sometimes, when the rest of us weren't looking, I'd see him tilt his head again, that same slight motion, like he was listening to something none of us could hear. Maybe he was. Maybe the war had tuned him to a different frequency, the one between life and death, where silence sounds like warning. Before we moved out again, he said something I'll never forget. We were cleaning our rifles beside the frozen well when he looked at me and said, "If I don't come back, don't tell them I was brave. Just tell them I was tired." I asked, "Tired of what?" He said, "Of seeing too clearly." Aye. And then he smiled, that same small, crooked smile he'd had the day we met, when he told me he saw better with the wrong eye. But there was no light behind it this time, only weight, only the reflection of all the faces he'd put in the ground. That was the last quiet moment before the next storm. The next dawn would make us run again, make us bleed again, make us question all over why some of us lived while better men didn't. But that night, I saw the real cost of what Sam carried. He wasn't the same boy from Ohio anymore. The forest had taken him apart piece by piece and rebuilt him into something colder, sharper, and infinitely lonelier. And now I'll ask you, because I still think about that moment, about him, about what war does to those who see too much. Have you ever carried something that wouldn't let you sleep? Type it below. Just write, I know what that feels like. Maybe Sam will hear it wherever he is. We left the Hurtgen behind in early January, or maybe it left us. It's hard to tell with places like that. You don't walk out of them, they stay inside you. The forest thinned out slowly, the ground turning from mud to frozen field, the smell of pine giving way to the bitter smoke of towns that had been shelled to ash. The snow followed us everywhere, falling heavy on the roofs of what was left of the villages, coating wrecked trucks and dead horses in silence. We were ghosts, moving through the aftermath of something that had already happened. The shooting never really stopped, but it felt distant now, muffled, like thunder on the other side of a mountain. Every morning we'd wake up, count who was still breathing, and keep moving east. That was the rhythm of those days. March, dig, fight, sleep when you can. Sam was still with us, still walking ahead, still seeing with that tilted head and calm breath. But something in him had shifted. He didn't talk much, didn't laugh, didn't even seem tired anymore. Just still, too still, like the war had carved him hollow and filled him with something else. I remember one afternoon, we passed through a small German village, what was left of it. Smoke curled out of the chimneys of collapsed homes, and you could hear a baby crying somewhere behind a wall. The lieutenant ordered us not to stop. We had orders to keep pushing forward toward the river, where the next line of defense was rumored to be. But Sam stopped. He knelt beside a well in the center of the square, brushing snow from the edge, and looked down. The water was frozen, a solid mirror of grey light. He said, I used to fish with my brother on a pond that looked just like this. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. He couldn't shoot a thing. Said he didn't like watching the ripples fade. He ran his glove over the ice, and for a moment I saw that kid again, the one who'd stumbled into our line weeks ago, scared, curious. Then he stood, slung his rifle back over his shoulder and said, I wonder if he'd still recognize me. There wasn't anything to say after. We just kept walking. That night, we camped by the river. It was cold enough to make your bones ache, and the only warmth came from the small fires we built inside our helmets. The men were quieter now. No one asked when it would end anymore. We all knew better. War doesn't end when they say it does. It ends years later, one nightmare at a time. I watched Sam sitting alone near the water's edge, the reflection of the flames flickering across his face. He had a letter in his hand, one he'd been carrying since December. The envelope was wrinkled and torn, the ink smeared from moisture, but he held it like it was made of glass. I asked him if he ever planned to open it. He shook his head. I already know what it says, he said. I just don't want to see the words. Then he tucked it back into his jacket, right over his heart, and stared at the dark river until the fire went out. The next day, we came across a farmhouse half buried in snow. It looked abandoned, roof half gone, windows shattered. The lieutenant sent Sam and me to check it for supplies. Inside, it was silent, dust floating in the air like snow trapped in a dream. There were dishes still on the table, a child's toy on the floor, a pair of boots by the door too small for any soldier to wear. War never just kills, it erases, and this house was proof. Sam walked through the rooms slowly, careful not to disturb anything, and stopped in front of a mirror hanging crooked on the wall. The glass was cracked through the middle, splitting his reflection in two. He stood there for a long time, studying his face. You ever look at yourself and not know which side is real? I told him I did, every damn day. He nodded, like he'd expected that, and said, the wrong eye always shows me the one that isn't. Then he turned and walked out. I stayed behind a moment, staring into that same mirror, and for the first time, I understood what he meant. You can live through enough horror that you start doubting the man you see looking back. That evening, when we rejoined the unit, there was talk that the war might be ending soon. Some of the guys started joking about home again, about hot coffee, clean sheets, baseball games, women who'd promised to wait. It sounded strange, almost wrong, like children whispering in a graveyard. Sam didn't say a word. He just sat sharpening his knife on a whetstone, slow, steady, the rhythm calm and endless. When one of the men asked what he'd do when he got back, he looked up and said, go blind probably. Everyone laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't. He meant it. The last week before we reached the Rhine was a blur of frozen marches, ruined bridges, and grey skies. We saw things no man should have to see. Civilians huddled in cellars, horses half buried in snow, towns with no names left. Through it all, Sam was our compass. He could spot an ambush before anyone else. He could sense danger like it was whispered in his ear. The lieutenant said he was born for it, but I knew better. Nobody is born for war. You just survive it long enough to start thinking you were. On our final night before crossing the river, Sam came to me and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're just trading ghosts?" I asked him what he meant. He said, "Every time I shoot, I feel like I'm taking one of theirs and giving away one of ours. Maybe that's why none of us ever really make it home." His words stuck in me like shrapnel. Even after he walked away, I kept hearing them over and over, and for the first time, I realized that he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of surviving. That's the cruelest thing war does. It makes men fear their own survival more than their death. That night, I couldn't sleep. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering everything we'd done, everything we were. When I looked toward the river, I saw Sam standing there again, rifle slung across his back, staring into the black water. He wasn't shivering, wasn't moving, just standing, like he was trying to find something on the other side. I almost called out to him, but I didn't. Some silences shouldn't be broken. I turned away, closed my eyes, and hoped morning would come quickly. But even now, all these years later, when the night gets quiet enough, I can still see him there, alone, still, and staring at the river that never ends. The war ended, but no one believed it at first. The radios said, "Surrender." The officers said, "Stand down," but the air didn't change. The birds didn't sing. The wind still smelled like smoke. We waited in our foxholes for hours, rifles ready, because none of us trusted quiet anymore. When you've spent months listening for the sound that kills you, silence feels like the cruelest trick. Then, slowly, the gunfire stopped. One front, then another. The artillery grew distant. The sky cleared in patches, grey breaking into something almost blue. Men started standing up one by one, blinking into the daylight like animals crawling out of a cave. Some cried, some laughed. I didn't do either. I just sat there with my rifle across my knees, staring at the mud drying on my boots. Sam was beside me, his head tilted as if he was still listening for something far off. "It's over," I said quietly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, eyes tired and hollow, and said, "No, it isn't. We just stopped shooting." They pulled us out a few days later. Trucks came rumbling through the countryside, loaded with men who didn't look alive, only paused. We passed through villages that had once been battlefields, now silent, except for children digging through rubble. People waved at us, smiling, cheering, throwing flowers, but we couldn't look them in the eye. You don't meet the gaze of someone who still believes in goodness when you've seen how easily it dies. Sam sat in the back of the truck, helmet off, wind in his hair, eyes lost somewhere in the horizon. Every so often, his fingers would twitch, like he was pulling an invisible trigger. I wanted to tell him he could stop now, that there were no more ridges to clear, no more snipers hidden in trees. But he already knew. That was the problem. He knew too much. When we reached the staging area near Cologne, the lieutenant gathered us for what he called closure. He said the war had been won, that we were going home, that our sacrifices meant something. I looked around at the men beside me, hollow-eyed, scarred, half of them limping, and wondered if he really believed that. Maybe he had to. Maybe someone had to. Sam didn't even stand in line. He stayed sitting on an old ammo crate, polishing his rifle one last time. The lieutenant walked over and told him to hand it in. Sam hesitated, his thumb brushing the worn stock. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he handed it over, slow and careful, like saying goodbye to an old friend. "You'll get a new one when you're home," the lieutenant said. Sam smiled faintly and replied, "No, sir, I don't think I will." We shipped out in late spring. The ocean was calm, almost too calm, stretching endless and indifferent beneath the grey sky. The men talked about home, about the first things they'd do, steak dinners, hot baths, women's voices that didn't sound like orders. I listened, but my mind was somewhere else. The waves against the hull sounded too much like distant shellfire. I remember standing on deck one night, watching the horizon, when Sam joined me. He was holding that letter again, the one he'd never opened. "You ever wonder what they'll think when we get back?" I said. "They'll call us heroes." He laughed, soft and bitter. "Heroes don't wake up shaking," he said. Then he tore the letter in half and let the pieces fall into the wind. I wanted to stop him, but he looked peaceful for the first time since I'd met him. Some things aren't meant to be read, they're meant to be carried. When we finally reached New York, the docks were packed with people waving flags, crying, shouting names. Bands played, cameras flashed. I saw men drop to their knees and weep at the sight of their families. But Sam and I just stood there at the rail, watching it all like strangers. He said, "Funny how they look at us like we're coming home from somewhere else, when really we're still out there." I didn't know what to say. He was right. The war might have ended, but the sound of it was still in our bones. You can't turn that off. You just learn to carry it quietly so it doesn't scare the people you love. A week later, we went our separate ways. He was headed to Ohio. I was bound for Boston. We shook hands, promised to write. He said, "If you ever hear I went blind, don't feel bad. Maybe I'll finally stop seeing the ones I shouldn't." I didn't know if he was joking, and I didn't ask. That was the last time I saw him. I watched him walk down the platform, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, fading into the crowd like a shadow swallowed by light. And then he was gone. Home was strange. The streets looked smaller, the noise too loud, the smiles too bright. People asked questions they didn't want real answers to. Was it bad? Did you kill anyone? Are you glad to be back? I learned to lie politely. It wasn't so bad. We did what we had to. Yeah, it's good to be home. But inside, the war kept talking. At night, I'd wake to the sound of branches snapping outside, and my hand would reach for a rifle that wasn't there. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a window and not recognize the man staring back. The same look I saw in Sam's eyes that last morning by the river. I wrote him once, months later. No reply. Then another letter came back stamped, "Return to sender." I don't know if he ever made it home, or if home made sense when he got there. Maybe he found peace. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just faded back into the quiet he always seemed to belong to. But some nights, when the world is still and my eyes start to close, I swear I can see him again in that grey forest, moving through fog, rifle steady, seeing everything the rest of us couldn't. And I wonder if he's still out there somewhere, watching. It's been more than 40 years since I last saw him, and still I hear those shots. 4 of them, always 4. Even now, when I close my eyes and let the world go still, I can see the forest through the fog, smell the wet bark, feel the dirt trembling beneath my elbow. People say time heals, but time doesn't heal war. It just buries it under quieter days. You learn to live on top of it, to smile when your grandchildren ask what the medals mean, to tell them stories about friendship instead of death, about bravery instead of fear. But when the house goes dark and the clock ticks too loud, the truth always comes back. The silence comes back. That same silence that followed Sam's rifle every time he fired. The one that didn't sound like victory, but like something had been erased from the world. Sometimes I think that's what war really is. A slow erasing of sound, colour and reason, until all that's left is a version of yourself that doesn't quite belong anywhere. I kept the last picture of our unit in my desk drawer. It's yellowed now, the edges torn, the faces almost gone. Sam stands in the middle, squinting at the camera like the light hurt his eyes. He looks calm, too calm. You'd never guess what those hands had done. I remember when the photo was taken, the war had just ended, and someone said, "Smile, boys, this one's for history." But when I look at it now, I don't see history. I see the weight we were trying to hide behind that forced grin. I see men pretending they weren't afraid to go home. The photographer told us to look forward, but the truth is, our eyes were all turned inward, each man staring at something only he could see. I never found out what happened to Sam. I tried once, wrote to his hometown, looked up his name in the veterans office. Nothing. It's like he never existed. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he'd had enough of being seen. Sometimes I like to think he found a small farm somewhere, a quiet place where the wind doesn't sound like artillery, and fog is just fog. Maybe he planted something that grows instead of bleeds. Maybe he went blind just like he said he would, and in that blindness, finally stopped seeing the ghosts. But part of me knows better. Men like Sam don't get ending. They just fade into the edges of stories like this one, half real, half memory, all pain. When I talk about him now, I can feel people listening differently. They lean in a little closer, like they're waiting for some great lesson, some truth that'll make sense of it all. But there isn't one. War doesn't teach. It only takes. It takes the loud ones fast and the quiet ones slow. Sam was one of the quiet ones. I still wonder if he ever forgave himself for being the one who lived. That's a question most of us never answer. You come home breathing, but part of you stays kneeling in the mud somewhere, rifle against your cheek, listening for a sound that doesn't exist anymore. That's the part nobody sees, the half of you that stayed behind. I used to visit the VA hospital every year, sit with the old-timers, trade stories, share a drink or two. Some of them could talk about it like it was another life, like the war happened to someone else. I never could. When I talked about Sam, about that wrong eye aim of his, they'd laugh, say it sounded like luck, like myth, but I knew better. It wasn't luck. It was cursed. A gift twisted the wrong way, sharp enough to cut the man who held it. He didn't survive because he saw clearer. He survived because he saw differently, saw through things we weren't meant to see through. And that's what broke him. Now I'm the last one left from that unit. I still keep the rifle they issued me, locked away in a chest in the attic. The metal's rusted, the wood split. But when I hold it, it still feels warm somehow, like it remembers. Sometimes I take it out, not to clean it or load it, just to hold it and remember the weight. It's heavier now than it was then. Everything is. If Sam could hear me now, I think I'd tell him that he was right, that peace never really comes, not the way we thought it would. It doesn't come in silence or medals or parade. It comes in the moments when you can finally close your eyes without seeing where you've been. I'm not sure I've reached that yet. Maybe I never will, but telling this story feels like a start. Maybe that's all we can keep telling it until someone else. So if you're still here, listening, if this story found you somewhere quiet, hit that like button, not for me, but for the ones who didn't come back, for the ones who saw too much with the wrong eye. And if you've ever carried a memory that doesn't let go, subscribe, because stories like this aren't just history. They're warnings whispered by men who still remember what silence really sounds like.